Hey Josh, and hey everyone, welcome back. So Josh, I've got an interesting one for you this week. I'd like to get your take on it. We're going to be talking about Jose Mourinho this week,
Okay.
just a heads up. But before we launch into that, I my trivia question for this week is going to be: so Jose Mourinho is one of three managers in the 21st century to have won the Champions League with two different teams. Can you tell me who the other two are?
Guardiola, because he did City and Barca.
Yeah,
Oh, now you got me on this other one. Oh, am I gonna kick myself about the other one?
I think you will. I'm going to cast your mind back to the Elite Managers podcast. There was one manager you thought was on the cusp.
Yeah, straight away. I was gonna go Guardiola and Angelotti, but then I was trying to think. Besides Real Madrid, I'm pretty sure Real Madrid. Who did Angelotti win a second Champions League with? And that's where I'm doubting myself. I'm gonna go with Angelotti, but
You're going to go Ancelotti? Well,
yeah.
you're good thing you went with your gut there because Ancelotti is correct. He won it with Milan in 2003.
Okay.
So that's I'm impressed actually. I thought I was going to get you with not with Guardiola, with Ancelotti, because obviously the 2003 one.
Yeah, I
But
didn't remember the 2003 one. I was just like, Angelotti seems like the logical next option.
no, it's a very very good shout. Okay, so launching into it, I kind of mentioned this previously, but I wanted to go a bit more in depth with it, and I basically want to. But what I want to ask you is: has Jose Mourinho's reputation and almost his history been overshadowed by his antics in the last, I'll say, probably 6 years, maybe since Tottenham, Man United and Tottenham? Do you think his stock has gone down mostly because of his antics?
So I think his stock has gone down, but I don't want to blame his antics for the reason. I'll explain why. Because I think Mourinho's antics were always part of, call it the Mourinho show. Obviously, you look back at when he first came to Chelsea in the first place, it was the whole "I'm the special one," and I think his time at Inter Milan and Real Madrid weren't exactly quiet periods in terms of his antics either. So I think anyone claiming that Mourinho's antics now, as if there's been a change, are his downfall, is probably a bit short sighted. Ultimately, we all know football is a results business. So when you're getting the results and then you're doing the shenanigans on the side, it's very glorified and everyone enjoys them. But as soon as you're not getting the results quite, they become villainized or weaponized against you very quickly. So that's kind of my take. And I think it's really, there's more examples of that past Mourinho for me, which kind of demonstrate the point. Like even you look at, say, Klopp, when maybe Liverpool aren't doing so well and he's, doing big celebrations, then it's like, oh, this guy's overdoing it, he's playing it up. But when they're winning and he's doing the fist pump and stuff after the game, everyone's talking about how exciting this is and it's amazing that we have this one-of-a-kind manager. And then the very next weekend, Arteta does it and everyone's going, oh, over-celebrating. So I've gone a bit on a side tangent here. Bringing it back in for a second, my point was just, I think the antics are very, they're framed based on your results. So when you're winning, these antics are what's helping him win in a way, getting the team behind him and building that us against them mentality. But when they're losing, it's like, oh, Mourinho is taking over the show. He's, I'm trying to think of the right word, but almost like a dictator in the team. He won't listen to anyone else or whatever. So that's my starting thoughts on it. What are yours?
That's fair. I think firstly, I'm just going to say typical Arsenal fan managing to bring Arteta into this conversation. He likes bringing Arteta into these elite manager conversations. Uh, but I sort of agree with you, and I think in terms of his downfall, I blame it on on obviously the results, but I also think he's picked the wrong teams. Man United were in a downward spiral, and he was the most successful manager since Alex Ferguson. And even with Eric Ten Hag doing whatever he's doing this season, I still think Man United played their best football under Mourinho, in terms of results, not in terms of style.
Yeah.
And then Tottenham, obviously, got Tottenham to a Champions League final, and then wasn't allowed to take them on for that final, which is just stupidity. And I think, which is why I say I think there's definitely been a downfall. I'm not going to deny that he's not winning championships, but I think it's not been as drastic a downfall as people are kind of making it out to be, because because of his antics, because of the way he talks in the press, and he's like, "Oh, my players aren't. Luke Shaw's not good enough," and at the time he wasn't good enough. And the Danny Rose incident
Tottenham.
at Tottenham, all these things, it kind of has given him a much more of a negative perception that his results have kind of obviously not winning championships doesn't help. If you're being like I do agree with you. If you're being aggressive and you're doing all this stuff and you're winning, no one really cares. But I think his stock as a manager has drastically dropped because of the antics, and I don't think it's fair on his performances, is what I'll say. But more importantly, do you think his antics are overshadowing his history?
So it sounds so funny because that's such a small difference in question, but I actually think it's a huge difference in answer. Because I went for your first question, I was like, no, definitely not. The antics are part of Mourinho. They're scrutinized in a frame because of results. To the question of does his antics overshadow his career, I'm on the total opposite side, and I think absolutely. I think people will, like, even now when you asked me the initial question, I spoke about Mourinho with Chelsea being the special one and all of those and those are antics as well. They're just framed in a positive light. But my point is that's what you remember from early doors Chelsea. And actually, as I'm thinking through this question, I'm remembering that when he came into Chelsea, Chelsea weren't the team that we think of, and maybe not this last 2 seasons, but they weren't the Chelsea that we think of the Abramovich era, winning Champions League, winning Premier Leagues, with pretty much winning all the titles every year. We didn't think of Chelsea like that when Mourinho came in. It was only when he came in and he started winning lots of titles that we now remember that side of Chelsea. So literally, Chelsea, to use Mourinho's own word, football heritage, Chelsea's football heritage pretty much comes from the sort of Mourinho seasons that he was there. So, but my point is, you don't remember that. You remember the special one. You remember him running down the touchline at Old Trafford. You remember these kind of things. And, I think we spoke about before, or maybe we didn't on the podcast, but how Wenger probably left Arsenal a bit too late. And now he's remembered kind of, again to quote Mourinho, as a specialist in failure by the end. And I'm not saying that Mourinho is quite remembered to that dramatic level, but my point is the end of his career, how it's kind of gone at United, how it's gone at Roma, clubs like this, and even Tottenham, is how I think he's going to end up being remembered more than, because it's ridiculous what he did at Porto, at Inter, even at Real Madrid, toppling that Barcelona team. And that was peak Messi, peak Guardiola, peak all of these things. So the fact that he did all of that in one career is more than most managers, just that segment, right? Just the Porto, Inter, and Real Madrid is more than most managers did in their whole career. But there's more to Mourinho's career than just that. Bringing it back to your question, my point is I think we will all just remember him for all of the antics and not actually for the just ridiculous level of stuff he did, championships and titles he won against the odds.
Yeah, I 100% agree on that in terms of it. I still think he's, in my book, he's still he's one of the top 5 managers to ever manage in the Premier League, and he's a manager who's overlooked in that conversation so often. Mm-hmm. And I understand there's a recency bias to it, where you got Guardiola, Klopp, and Sir Alex are probably the top 3 for everyone. But I'm putting Mourinho ahead of Klopp every time. Mourinho took that Chelsea team. And yeah, people talk about the funds that he got, and I'm not going to deny that. But even before that, he took a team like Porto to the Champions League final, like that, and he won it. That's what he did with Porto. And then he took Chelsea, and it wasn't just with money. I mean, John Terry under him became one of the best centre backs the Premier League's ever seen. All that stuff, and then you go to Madrid. What were you going to say?
Yeah, sorry to catch you up mid sentence there. Just something that as you spoke about John Terry, and it reminded me. I think something that Mourinho had that most other managers don't, or at least the new ones coming through, is influence on players. And there was a story that John Terry, you said John Terry reminded me of this, that he spoke about that when Mourinho came back to Chelsea for the second time, it was in the off season that it got told to the Chelsea players. And John Terry tells a story of he was out for dinner with his wife, having some wine, having a good off season, whatever. He got a call from Mourinho saying, "I'm coming back. I want you to be my captain. You're going to play every game." Obviously, John Terry was a little bit older at that point. But having Mourinho call him and say that, he said he instantly put down the wine. He was suddenly going for all the training in the off-season, getting himself ready. Because when Mourinho calls you and tells you that, you drop everything for him, which I just haven't heard stories necessarily like that. Like even with Guardiola, who you would say probably has that kind of influence in the modern day of football, I think it's different. It's almost like everyone's so scared of Guardiola because they're going to get like, because Guardiola will throw anyone out the squad. Doesn't matter if you're Haaland or you're Cancelo or whoever you are. If you don't listen to him, you're thrown out. So it's almost like they're just scared to be exiled from the squad, as opposed to they're like, I got to impress this guy. He's my guy. I've got to die for him, kind of thing. It's a bit of a different reaction. And I haven't heard of another manager who's had that kind of pull or influence as Mourinho did in his pomp.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. I think his influence, and don't get me wrong, I think there was some fear in terms of it, but it's not he wasn't feared to the same level as like Sir Alex Ferguson where you're getting transferred or Guardiola where you're getting dropped. His I feel like the fear of him was more disappointing him, if you know what I mean. He didn't want to disappoint, especially in the early doors. His attitude, I think, has changed, and I will agree with that. But I think early doors, he just didn't want to disappoint Mourinho. Um, but yeah, I think, and the one thing that a lot of people don't credit Mourinho for is Cristiano Ronaldo. Ronaldo's rise was under Mourinho. Yeah, he did very well at Man United, but you think of Ronaldo at his prime, it's in Real Madrid, and it was under Mourinho. And I think the antics have overshadowed his achievements, which is quite disappointing. But it's understandable, but it is disappointing when you look at even when he went to Tottenham, he still was one of their best managers. He took them to a Champions League final, probably would have won that final realistically. Won a European trophy with Man United, which they hadn't done. All that. So I think I do think that. Well, I'm going to leave you with one last thought here, though, Josh. I don't necessarily need an answer, but my last thought to you here is Mourinho. I think for him to really save the end of his career and retire on the best high would be to take an international team because Mourinho is a tournament manager, and if he took an international team like England into a tournament, I think that team's winning that tournament. I'm not sure if you agree, disagree.
I don't disagree that I think him rocking up for a big tournament would suit him and gain the results. I actually don't think, though, in England suits him because I think the English fans, I'm not saying they have been entertained with good football in the last few years, but I think they want to be entertained with some good football. And I think Mourinho, funny enough, obviously him being Portuguese helps, but Portugal could suit him with a more counter-attacking style and coming into a lot of those bigger games as the underdog and then hitting teams and winning those games that people don't expect him to. That to me would be like them winning another European title or even a World Cup, dare I say it, would be a real Mourinho kind of story to end it all off with like a Portugal, maybe with like a Denmark, like that kind of team that's almost
Yeah,
just below the top team, but still clearly got some quality players. So you said you had a last thought. I have one last thing. There's a lot to say on Mourinho. The one thing I also want to credit Mourinho is he always had such a great understanding of a squad in terms of what a squad requires, in terms of what kinds of different physical players, what kind of different technical players, and given money, his balancing of squads almost to me seemed better than most managers. You think back to that original Chelsea team, he didn't just get any good striker. You get like a Drogba type striker. He knew the kind of strike, and you saw when he went to Man U, he tried to mimic that with Lukaku. It didn't work out perfectly. But my point is, even the balance of the squads, he had a really strong idea and identity about the type of player he wanted in every position. I don't just want a 10 in the sort of attacking mid role. I want a very specific type of 10 in that role. And I think some managers are just like, oh, I play whatever 4-3-3, 3-5-2, whatever, and they're not as phased about who the individual is in the role. Mourinho was always really phased about who the individual was in every position, which I think is still unique to Mourinho.
Yeah, that's actually a point I never thought about, and the more I think about it, that's definitely something that
podcast.
that's another podcast.
Yeah.
But I definitely agree there. I think overall we're probably in agreement, unfortunately, that his antics have kind of overshadowed it. I would like to hope that anyone who listens to this podcast has their mind changed and realize how elite he was. If you don't agree, though, everyone just send us a comment, let us know your thoughts on it, and let us know what you'd like us to talk about next time. Until then, cheers.